Let's start with new calls for the feds to hold a public inquiry into foreign election interference. On Thursday, opposition members on a parliamentary committee voted to do just that, but the motion is not binding on the government. And while intelligence and elections officials have repeated that the results of the last two elections were legitimate, they also concede there were attempts by foreign actors to interfere.
There is a baseline amount of foreign interference going on every day in Canada that we need to be mindful of, but that I was not aware of any spike in foreign interference during either the 2019 or 2021 election campaigns, and I stand by that.
We have been clear that the principal threat to Canada comes from the People's Republic of China. But to be clear, the threat does not come from the Chinese people, but rather from the Chinese Communist Party and the government of China.
Now, Beijing strongly denies all of that, but new polls show Canadians are not convinced. According to Nanos research, 7 in 10 Canadians say Chinese government interference in our 2021 election is a major threat to our democracy. Meanwhile, an independent report released this week about the 2021 election also acknowledged interference, but did conclude a panel designed to flag interference did not detect that it threatened Canada's ability to have free and fair elections. Morris Rosenberg is the man who wrote that report, and he's here now. Hi, Mr. Rosenberg. Good to meet you and good to have you here in studio.
Nice to be here, Vashi.
I appreciate you making the time. I have a number of questions about the report that you authored, but before I get to those, I wanted to start off on what has formed the substance of some of the criticism of that report and you yourself from the opposition. And it involves your time at the Trudeau Foundation. You headed up that foundation when, during the time rather, that a Chinese businessman who has ties to China, the Chinese government rather, made a $200,000 donation. This week the foundation returned that donation. The leader of the Bloc Québécois, for example, says because of your work there, because of that involvement, you yourself have a deficiency of credibility. How do you respond to that?
So I'd say, first of all, I mean, I have a number of things to say about it. First of all, I'd say I have worked, I had a 34-year career in government that was split between working for liberal governments and conservative governments. I was a deputy minister for 17 years under first the Liberals and then the Conservatives. And when I left and joined the Trudeau Foundation, you have to understand the Trudeau Foundation is named after Pierre Elliott Trudeau. It is an independent, non-partisan body, and it's had on its board of directors and as part of its membership people from all political stripes, Liberals, NDP, Conservatives. Now, the Globe and Mail published a report this week that a source from CSIS says that there had been information that there were conversations between a Chinese consular official and one of these businessmen saying, and the Chinese consular official saying that he ought to donate to the Trudeau Foundation. I had never heard of that until
this was the first you read of it.
First that I read of it. So we were never informed. If anybody did have any information that there was something untoward about this, I wasn't informed about it. The other thing I would say is that you have to look a little bit at the historical context. So put yourself back in 2015, 2016, when the Canadian attitude about the relationship with China was very different, very hopeful, and much more positive, and trusting, I would say. And then if you fast forward to the last couple of years, there's been kind of a steady deterioration in that relationship for a number of issues. So had we been there today, would the same thing have happened?
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah. Do you, now, sort of, with the information we have now and what's transpired in the years since, do you think you would have made a different decision?
No, I think I would have made it. I think there would have been a different decision made for sure.
Just before I move on to the report, do you understand, I guess, the criticism or the I mean, the timing of this is all, it all bleeds together, right? Because we were saying before the interview, a month ago, if this happened, in this report, your report was released, it wouldn't be against the backdrop of everything people have read in the Globe and Mail in the last 2 weeks. Do you understand how your credibility is called into question, or the report's credibility based on the kinds of stuff people have been reading?
Yeah, I understand, but I go back and reiterate again that I worked for that foundation for 4 years. I worked there on the assumption that although it was named for Pierre Elliott Trudeau, it's not part of the government. It is an independent, nonpartisan foundation. I have always conducted myself in a nonpartisan way, and that's how I conducted myself there. And then you're looking at a donation at that time for conferences, not a donation, that on its face had anything to do with politics. Maybe we were naive back then, but I think, and then when I was offered this contract by the Privy Council office in the summer to look at one, particular and quite technical aspect of preparation for elections, I didn't think there was an issue.
Let's get to what you were looking at there, and it is a very specific review that you conducted, right? It was on the work of the panel that it essentially is supposed to tell Canadians, hey, there is a problem with foreign interference or interference, period, and it's a problem because it's compromised the integrity of the election. They haven't done so because they didn't feel that was the case.
Exactly.
And you reiterated that's the conclusion they arrived at through your report. And yet, Canadians right now, overwhelmingly, 2 polls this week have shown us, including one done for CTV from Nanos Research, are really worried about what they're reading, despite the conclusion that panel reached, which was, as I said, communicated through your report. Are you sympathetic to those worries right now?
Given the information that's been in the media in the last couple of weeks, information that I wasn't privy to when I was doing my report, and I can't comment on the veracity of the information. It's leaked information. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to the bottom of that. But I understand the concerns of Canadians. And I guess the irony is that one of the goals of foreign interference is to undermine the confidence of Canadians in our democratic institutions. And that seems to have succeeded. The confidence of Canadians in our democratic institutions, to look at the Angus Reid poll, and you've mentioned there's a Nanos poll out also, that has somewhere between 2/3 and 70% of people worried about this, it raises an issue, and the issue is going to have to be addressed in some way.
And when you say in some way, the government has pointed to mechanisms already in place as a means of doing that, including the conclusions as telegraphed through your report, that the integrity of the election was not compromised in 21 or the one before it in 19 through a different report. Do you see a purpose for something that goes beyond that?
Yeah, I think at this point, consideration needs to be given to doing something else. And I know I've been out of the country, but I've been reading there's been a live debate among people that I know well, some of whom are advocating very strongly for a public inquiry, some of whom are saying, that a public inquiry actually will not do the trick. And the reasons those who are against the public inquiry are saying that a public inquiry takes a long time to get started. It takes a long time before it'll be wrapped up. It'll be likely after the next election that something like that is finalized and recommendations are out. And then it takes a number of years to implement recommendations. And then, of course, there's the problem of how to deal with sensitive national security classified information that can't be treated in a public way and would reduce the ability of the public to understand what's going on. Now, that's not a completely insurmountable problem. There have been other precedents in the past of bringing in sort of respected retired judges who have security clearances who could at least look at the documents even if they didn't fully explain what they were. So, it's an option that I think needs to be on the table, but I would also say that it's important to think through what is the scope of the public inquiry.
I sense from what I'm hearing from you, and if I'm reading between the lines, you do think that there are other things the government could be pursuing right now to combat the threat of interference.
Yes, and I think it has to, and I don't think whatever happens with whether there's a public inquiry or not, it ought not to take away from the sense of urgency that the government should have about continuing to work on this. I saw that the government is now looking at the possibility of a foreign influence registry,
right,
as the Americans and the Australians have done. And I also think, and there have been calls for this in both of these reports, to do a review of the CSIS Act, which with some amendments, but it dates from 1984, to ensure that the mechanisms are in place to deal with an evolving set of threats.
Mm-hmm. if I could leave our conversation on this, is it fair to say you don't think your report is the final word on this?
The final word? No. I mean, I think my report is dealing with an aspect of this. It's dealing with the protocol. And if you look at the recommendations in my report, I make 16 recommendations that deal with everything from better communications, earlier communications, to improvements to the composition of the panel, the preparedness of the panel, its ability to work with civil society actors, better relations with political parties.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Rosenberg. Pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.